Welcome to a presentation on how to make sure your business is safe after the COVID lockdown measures have been eased. The presentation is being delivered today by representatives from County Durham and Darlington Fire and Rescue Service, Northumberland Fire and Rescue Service, Cleveland Fire Brigade and Tyne and Wear Fire and Rescue Service. And what we intend to do is give you some up-to-date advice on how to make sure your premise is safe for yourself, your staff and the people using it. The aim of the presentation is to give you a very quick background over the fire safety legislation, where it's come from and what it means to you, the requirements of the responsible person, actions they should take in making sure that the premises is safe, and also we're going to give you an advice on a very simple 5-step method of carrying out a fire risk assessment in your premises. At the end, we'll also give you the opportunity to take down our email addresses, so if there's any bespoke advice you need from the relevant fire authority, please get in touch.
Okay, so the piece of legislation that we're talking about today is the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order of 2005. This was brought in to consolidate over 70 pieces of legislation and basically to clarify what requirements are needed for a premises to be safe. The legislation puts the onus on the most appropriate person to identify the risk from a fire in their premises, and that's basically the person or the people who are creating the risk. And this enables the individual to identify the most appropriate controls to mitigate the risk from a fire. And you do that by carrying out a fire risk assessment and noting down the significant findings, and obviously acting on those significant findings as well. There haven't been any changes at all to the fire safety order because of COVID-19. The fire precautions in your premises are still there to protect people in the immediate vicinity or inside your premises, and they are all still very, very relevant even after the COVID shutdown.
So the Fire Safety Order, or the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order, defines the responsible person as the employer if they have a degree of control. Alternatively, it could be the owner of the premises or the business if indeed they have a degree of control. However, whoever it is who's responsible for the premises has a duty to take general fire precautions within that premises. Those general fire precautions include reducing the risk in relation to a fire, ensuring there are adequate means of escape for the people within the premises to escape should a fire occur. Means of firefighting are available on the premises. Generally, these are fire extinguishers. Means of detecting and giving warning should a fire occur. And again, the actions to be taken in the event of a fire occurring, an evacuation strategy. COVID situation, again, has not changed who is responsible, and indeed it hasn't changed the need to take general fire precautions. All it means is that these elements, which I've just laid out there, will need to be reviewed and assessed based on your current situation following reopening it into the new norm.
Okay, so Article 9 of the Fire Safety Order imposes the responsibility on the responsible person to have a suitable and sufficient fire risk assessment in place for the premises. What we're going to do now is go through the 5-step method to conducting one of these fire risk assessments for your premises. So the first step is to identify any fire hazards. So if we start with sources of fuel, what you're going to be looking out for on your premises are flammable liquids. So if you've got any paints or adhesives or varnishes on your premises, alcohols, white spirits, things like that. All of your furnishings are obviously a solid source of fuel. When we're talking about shops, there's obviously from COVID-19, there's going to be the return policy, so 72-hour return policy, where you've got to keep excess stock on site. So that's obviously something that you need to take into account for your fire risk assessment, that you're going to have excess fuel storage on site. The next thing you need to identify is sources of ignition. So we're looking at cooking equipment, any electrical equipment, heating equipment. Arson is also one, so the security of the site needs to be identified in the fire risk assessment and how you're reducing the risk of arson. And finally, oxygen, so sources of oxygen. Obviously, we have a source of oxygen all around us in the air, but then also oxidizing chemicals that you might have on your site need to be identified within the risk assessment as well.
Next step is to identify the people at risk. So when you're looking at this, you need to ask yourself the question, who's using the building? You've got yourself, you've got your employees. There may be employees who are lone working, so how will they know if there's a fire occurs anywhere on the premises? Have you got that covered? You've got cleaners, security staff, visitors, customers. Visitors and customers in particular will be unfamiliar with the premises. So do you need to give them any instruction when they're on the premises to what methods you've got in place to evacuate or to make sure people are safe? With regards to COVID, you need to look at these measures that you've got in place, and has any additional sort of controls to make sure social distancing is maintained. Has that affected plans? Has it affected your means of escape, your routes, etc.? So it's just a consideration. You've also got to consider anybody with disabilities. Do they bring their own responsible persons, carers, etc.? Do you need to put further provisions in place to make sure they can get out in the event of an emergency? Following that, you need to evaluate the risk of a fire occurring. And there's three areas to look at there. You've got accidental fires, you've got electrical equipment, waste build-up material, etc. Make sure your electrical equipment is tested regularly under the PAT testing regime. And also you've got deliberate fires, which we've covered arson before. It's just making sure you take away any opportunities for people to set deliberate fires in the vicinity or in your premises.
Okay, so the next part is to evaluate the risk to the people. So having identified the people at risk and the likelihood of a fire occurring, it's highly unlikely that you will have concluded that there's absolutely no chance of a fire starting anywhere in your premises. So you now need to evaluate the actual risk to those people should a fire start and should it spread from the various locations that you've identified could be a risk. So always think of the worst case scenario. If a fire breaks out, can everybody get out of your premises? Is there an alternative exit from rooms? Is there an alternative exit from the building? If there is, are they always clear? Walk the exit routes to confirm that any final exit doors operate and the external areas are clear. And do you need to maintain social distancing at assembly points once you get outside? Also consider access for those people that may have additional needs. Could be people with mobility issues, people who are deaf, people who are blind may need additional help to actually get out of the building. And have you given all the people that could be in the building enough information to use the premises safely, to not cause a fire and to escape should they have to? Have you done some updated fire training if the building's changed slightly? And due to COVID-19, you may have had changes to staffing or occupancy levels. You could have had areas of your premises that are not now being used, or they could be getting used for different reasons, like storerooms. Has that affected the escape routes at all? Is there an overspill of stock? And if so, has that affected escape rooms? Are there enough staff? If you're cutting down on staff numbers, are there enough staff to actually help to evacuate? Do you still have the fire wardens in place? Make sure that they're all still available, and have they been trained if any of the if there's any changes to procedures at all, have you made sure they know that? Fire doors should never be held open. If they are to be held open, the only way they should be done is by using the correct hold open devices, which are usually a magnetic device that close on the operation of a fire alarm. Do not wedge fire doors open just in order to stop touching points or contact points, because fire doors are there for a reason, and that's to stop the spread of fire and smoke. Make sure as well that you test your fire protection systems that you've got in place, your fire alarm, your emergency lighting, your extinguishers. Make sure they're all in test and make sure they're all working correctly. Signs and notices, are they all still visible and appropriate if you've changed routes throughout your premise? If you've got a fire exit sign that points to somewhere that is no longer a fire exit, make sure that that's changed. And also temporary structures that might affect the interior of the premises, and they might block or interfere with the external escape routes. Just make sure any changes you've made are still safe as far as fire evacuation goes.
So next we move to record, plan, inform and instruct and train. So it's important when you do undertake fire risk assessment that you record the significant findings of that risk assessment. Those significant findings would include the fire hazards you've identified during the assessment, the actions you have taken to remove or reduce the chance of a fire occurring within your premises, the people you've identified who may be at risk should a fire occur, the actions you have taken to reduce the risk to those people from the spread of fire or smoke within the premises, the actions people need to take should a fire occur, that would be your emergency plan, and also you must provide instruction, information to your staff and the people within your premises following your recording of significant findings. Within your workplace, once you've done your significant findings, you may have other responsible people. If you work in a multi-occupied premises, it's important to share your significant findings with those people, as well as sharing your emergency plan if that is relevant. During the COVID situation, it's important, because of the potential changes you've made to your premises, it's important that your risk assessment is reviewed and alterations made to your risk assessments take into account those changes you have made, and also that your staff are aware of the changes of that risk assessment and any other, and they're aware and they are trained in any additional requirements you've got for fire evacuation should a fire occur during this COVID situation. You have to remember to ask yourself, if we turned up to your premises, could you provide everything that we ask for? That includes the fire risk assessment, details of the fire alarm and the emergency lighting testing, and the actions you need to take or that you're going to take should a fire occur.
So finally, we have the review stage. So risk assessments should be reviewed regularly, but they should also be reviewed when there's any changes to the premises. So these changes could include changes to the activities that you're carrying out on site, any introduction of new equipment that you haven't used before, alterations to the building, including internal layout. So this is where it becomes important for the COVID-19 measures, because obviously we've got these one-way systems, we've got maybe exits in different places. So you need to make sure that the risk assessment is suitable for the building in its current state and for its current usage. Any furniture changing, again, furnitures and fixings are probably going to have been moved around because of these COVID-19 measures. So again, you just need to make sure that the risk assessment you've got is, if you've already got one in place, is still suitable for the way that you've laid out your building now for the COVID-19 restrictions. If there's any increase in storage of hazardous materials or any increase in storage of fuel, really, which, like I said before, you probably will have if you're shops because of the return policy. You possibly could have if your restaurants opening or pubs are reopening, you might have the increase in stock. So again, review your risk assessment to make sure that those changes have been taken into account. Going forward, you should also review if you have any failings of the fire safety precautions there in your current fire risk assessment. Obviously, if something has failed and there's a loss occurred, then there might be something in your fire risk assessment that's not in there that should have been, or something that might need reviewing because of new information that has come to light because of the things that have happened. So also, if the presence of the people change, so if you're getting more disabled people in, if the use of the premises changes and the type of people you're getting in changes, or the amount of people you're getting in changes, again, the risk assessment will need to be reviewed to reflect that. Obviously, for COVID-19, your occupancy should be coming down, but when we're talking about people that maybe have a disability, are they going to be allowed to bring their usual carers in? Will they still have the amount of people that could help them around the premises? Things like that need to be considered when you're looking at reviewing your fire risk assessment.
So the last thing to ask yourself is, these are very strange times that we've entered in, and COVID and the restrictions imposed by the government in relation to COVID have made it a very unique situation where we are all learning as we're going. As businesses open up, you will have questions, and what we are trying to do today is make sure that you realise we are here to help. We are here to help you. Sorry, we both want the same thing. We want safe buildings that comply with the legislation, and on this last page we've put all our contact email addresses, so you can forward any questions you have or you would like clarification on to these addresses for your relevant fire and rescue service. Thank you for listening to our presentation. We hope it's been helpful, and as I say, if there's any questions you have, please forward them to the relevant fire safety department. Thank you.